Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was born as a Kryptonian on planet Krypton. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The light on Krypton was old. It wasn't the vibrant, youthful glow of a yellow star, but the ancient, crimson luminescence of Ra, a red giant heavy with the weight of eons. It bathed Argo City in a perpetual, dignified twilight, filtering through the crystalline spires that soared miles into the thin, curated atmosphere. The light didn't so much illuminate as it did saturate, staining the world in hues of ruby and rose. It was a beautiful, solemn light, the kind one might find in a tomb for gods. And in the heart of Argo City, within the grand archives of the House of Midori, Aizo felt that solemnity down to his marrow. He sat cross-legged on the polished obsidian floor, surrounded by towering racks of sunstones. Each crystal, no larger than his fist, hummed with a latent energy, a universe of information dormant within its geometric facets. They held the whole of Krypton, its history, its science, its art, its laws, and most importantly, the genetic codex that dictated the life of every person born from the Genesis chamber. Aizo ran a slender finger over the surface of the crystal resting in his lap. It was cool and impossibly smooth. This particular sunstone contained the chronicles of the legendary military leader, Admiral Druzad. With a thought, Aizo interfaced with the stone, and holographic text scrolled in the air before his emerald eyes, accounts of glorious victories, tactical masterstrokes, and displays of physical prowess that bordered on mythological. He was supposed to be archiving, cross-referencing data for planetary census records. It was the designated function of his house, a quiet and respectable, if minor, role in Krypton's rigid caste system. But his mind, as always, strayed. It craved the stories of heroes, of Kryptonians who pushed the boundaries of their designated functions. He absorbed the information with a feverish intensity, his lips moving silently as he processed strategies, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was a habit that had earned him ridicule since his earliest days in the creche, the constant, quiet muttering, as if his brain was a vessel so overfull it was perpetually leaking. A chime, soft as falling snow, echoed through the archives, signaling the end of his work cycle. Aizo sighed, carefully placing the sunstone back in its designated slot. As he stood, he caught his reflection in the polished wall. He was small for a Kryptonian, his frame slight where others were broad, his muscles lean where others were dense. His house was not known for physical might. They were scribes, scientists, and archivists, but even among them, he was an outlier. A harmless genetic anomaly, the Genesis matrix had reported upon his decanting, suboptimal physical metrics. In a society built on the bedrock of genetic perfection, suboptimal was a brand. It was his version of being broken. He straightened the simple gray tunic of his house and made his way toward the transport platform. His next cycle was in the youth training spire, a mandatory session for all adolescents to hone the skills of their designated guild. For most, it was a formality. For Aizo, it was a bi-daily ritual of humiliation. The training spire was a stark contrast to the silent reverence of the archives. It was a cavern of noise and kinetic energy. The air thrummed with the hum of anti-gravity plates and the sharp crackle of hard light constructs. Young Kryptonians from every guild, military, science, engineer, artist, moved with a grace and power that seemed innate, a birthright Aizo had been denied. At the center of the vast chamber stood Katsuki of the House of Bach. Even from across the room, he was a vortex of presence. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a shock of ash-blonde hair that seemed to defy Krypton's ordered sensibilities, Katsuki was the genetic ideal of the military guild. Every movement was precise and explosive, a testament to a body engineered for conflict. He was currently engaged in a combat simulation, facing down a squadron of holographic guard constructs. "Is that all you've got?" Katsuki roared, his voice echoing in the chamber. He didn't evade the constructs, he met them head-on. A glowing plasma bolt was fired at him, and he swatted it aside with a contemptuous backhand, the energy dissipating harmlessly against his personal kinetic field. He lunged, a crimson blur, and shattered one construct with a single, brutal punch. He spun, his legs scything through the air to shatter another. It wasn't a fight, it was a demolition. Izel watched, a familiar, bitter cocktail of awe and envy churning in his gut. Katsuki was everything he wasn't. Strong. Confident. Perfect. He was the hero from the Sunstone Chronicles brought to life. They had been decanted in the same cycle, a fact Katsuki never let him forget. It was as if Izel's existence was a personal insult to Katsuki's perfection, a flaw in their shared vintage. Izel of House Midori, the synthesized voice of the training master called out. Your turn. Objective, secure the energy cell from the central plinth. Standard guard constructs are active. A collective sigh seemed to ripple through the other youths. Izel's turn was always a slow, pathetic affair. He took a deep breath, the curated air tasting stale, and walked onto the simulation floor. The smooth, white expanse lit up around him, and 5 guard constructs materialized in a defensive circle around the glowing blue cylinder on a raised platform. He began to mutter, a low, rapid-fire stream of analysis. Okay, 5 constructs. Standard phalanx formation. Overlapping fields of fire. Their reaction time is 0.8 seconds. My top speed can't clear the kill zone in time. Direct assault is not an option. From the sidelines, Katsuki laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Still whispering to yourself, scribe? Are you trying to bore them to death? Izel's cheeks burned. He ignored the jibe and started forward in a cautious, shuffling run. He feinted left, and 2 constructs immediately tracked his movement, their weapon arms glowing. He darted right, and another pivoted to cut off his path. They were too fast, their programming too perfect. He saw a flicker of an opening and committed, a desperate burst of speed that was, by Kryptonian standards, a gentle jog. A plasma bolt struck him square in the chest. It was non-lethal, designed only to paralyze the target and signal elimination, but the kinetic force sent him tumbling backward onto the floor. A tingling numbness spread through his limbs. The simulation ended. Failure. Time elapsed, 12 seconds. Laughter echoed around him. Pathetic, Katsuki sneered, stalking onto the floor as Izel's paralysis wore off. You are a flaw in the codex, a waste of a spot. You think your little notes and whispers can ever compare to real strength? You will always be a weakling, finding ways to avoid a real fight. He shoved Izel's shoulder as he passed, a casual display of strength that sent the smaller boy stumbling. Izel caught himself, his fists clenched at his sides, his gaze fixed on the floor. Katsuki was right. He couldn't fight. He couldn't win. His body was a cage, and his brilliant mind could only pace its confines. He was dismissed from the floor, his cheeks burning with shame. He retreated to an observation alcove, pulling out his personal datapad. But he wasn't sulking. He was observing. His emerald eyes, no longer clouded with shame, were now sharp with analytical focus. He watched as the next youth, a girl from the Engineer Guild, tried a different approach, using a deployable energy shield that was quickly overwhelmed. Then another, from the Artist Guild, tried to confuse their sensors with a cascade of holographic duplicates, a tactic that failed in seconds. They were all trying to overcome the constructs. They were treating it as a battle. Izel's fingers flew across the surface of his datapad, not with notes, but with lines of code. He wasn't looking at the constructs anymore. He was looking at the system running them, the simulation parameters. He whispered, his voice barely audible. The constructs draw power from the same central grid, but to prevent system overload, there must be a distribution governor, a subroutine that allocates energy based on tactical needs. He found it. A simple, elegant piece of code buried deep in the simulation's architecture. It was designed to ensure a fair and balanced challenge. But every system had a weakness. Every program had an exploit. His shame was forgotten, replaced by the thrilling hum of discovery. He didn't need to be strong enough to break the constructs. He just needed to be smart enough to break their rules. A tall, commanding figure entered the observation alcove, his shadow falling over Izel. The man wore the dark blue robes of the High Science Guild, adorned with a sigil Izel knew by heart, the crest of the House of L. Losing yourself in the data again, Izel? The man asked. His voice was a deep, calm baritone that held an undercurrent of weariness. Izel jumped, hastily trying to hide his datapad. Councilman Jor-El. I was just reviewing my performance. Jor-El, Krypton's most brilliant and controversial scientist, offered a small, sad smile. His face was lined with a worry that seemed alien on a Kryptonian, a people for whom all things were preordained and certain. I saw your performance. And I saw Katsuki's. Tell me, whose was more successful? His, of course, Aizel said automatically. He is the pinnacle of the military guild. He destroyed 5 light constructs, Jor-El corrected gently. The objective was to secure the energy cell. He failed. As did the others. Jor-El gestured to Aizel's datapad. You, on the other hand, were not looking at the problem. You were looking at the system behind the problem. Show me. Hesitantly, Aizel displayed his screen. He had written a tiny, parasitic string of code. It wouldn't grant him victory, not directly. It was more subtle. When a construct initiates a full-power weapon discharge, Aizel explained, his voice gaining confidence as he shifted to his area of expertise, the governor's subroutine shunts a minute amount of excess power back to the grid to prevent feedback loops. My script piggybacks on that shunt. If I can trigger all 5 constructs to fire simultaneously at a single, non-critical point, the script will force the governor to interpret the 5 simultaneous shunts as a critical power surge and initiate a system-wide diagnostic reset. The constructs will freeze for 2.3 seconds, enough time to walk to the plinth and retrieve the cell. Jor-El studied the code, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant clash of the ongoing simulations. You found a solution not through strength, but through understanding, Jor-El said finally, his voice holding a note of profound approval. You did not play the game, Aizel. You analyzed the board. Strength is not the only measure of a Kryptonian. Do not let them convince you otherwise. The praise from the man he admired more than anyone on the planet felt like a physical warmth spreading through his chest, a shield against the sting of Katsuki's scorn. It was a fleeting moment of validation in a life defined by inadequacy. Come, Jor-El said, turning to leave. Walk with me. There is something I need your analytical mind for. A problem far greater than holographic soldiers. The transport whisked them silently upward, through the heart of Argo City and toward the apex of the science spire. They passed residential habdomes, engineering strata, and guild halls, all interconnected by a web of crystalline causeways. It was a city of perfect order, a society running like a flawless machine. But as they reached the peak, the view changed. They were in Jor-El's private observatory, a place Aizel had only read about. The dome above them was not a screen, but a transparent crystal lens, a great eye looking not out at the distant, cold stars, but down, deep into the heart of their world. A massive, swirling holographic projection of Krypton dominated the center of the room. It was not the serene, stable globe from the public broadcasts. This image was angry. Unstable. Veins of fiery orange and sickly yellow pulsed within the planet's core, a cosmic arrhythmia. The Council sees this and calls it minor geologic instability, Jor-El said, his voice laced with a bitterness Aizel had never heard from him. They say our models are flawed, that my predictions are alarmist. They are fools, blinded by 1,000 years of ossified certainty. Aizel stared at the projection, his analytical mind kicking into overdrive. The energy readings displayed beside the globe were chaotic, spiking and plummeting with no discernible pattern. The core's fusion process. It's breaking down, he breathed, the realization a cold stone in his stomach. The pressure fluctuations are exponential. This isn't instability. This is a death rattle. Precisely, Jor-El affirmed, his gaze fixed on the dying heart of their world. I have presented my findings to the High Council 3 times. They have dismissed them 3 times. They accuse me of heresy, of trying to incite panic and subvert the will of the Genesis Chamber. Their faith in our technology has become a blind dogma. They believe Krypton is eternal, therefore it must be. He turned to Aizel, his eyes burning with a desperate intensity. But you do not accept the surface-level answer. You look for the hidden systems, the underlying code. I need that mind, Aizel. Jor-El gestured to a secondary console, bringing up a cascade of ancient geological surveys and seismic data from Krypton's forgotten past, data that hadn't been accessed in centuries. The Council's models are based on the last 10 millennia of stability. They are ignoring the deep history of our world. I need you to cross-reference these ancient records with the current core readings. Look for patterns, for precedents, for anything they have missed. They trust the archives of your house. Data presented by a scribe of Midori may hold weight where the theories of a heretic from the House of El do not. The weight of the request was immense. This wasn't a training simulation. This was the fate of their entire world. For the first time, Izel's small stature and physical weakness felt utterly irrelevant. Jor-El wasn't asking him to fight. He was asking him to think. He was giving him the most important task on the planet. I will, Councilman, Izel said, his voice firm, all traces of his earlier shame gone. I will find the truth. I know you will, Jor-El said, placing a heavy hand on Izel's shoulder. The future of Krypton may well depend on it. The journey back to his residential block felt different. The silent, gliding skyships now seemed like specters in a graveyard. The perfect, geometric lines of the city felt brittle, a crystal cage waiting to shatter. The crimson glow of Rao felt less like a dignified twilight and more like the light of a dying ember. He saw Katsuki across a causeway, surrounded by other members of the military guild. They were laughing, their movements powerful and sure, their place in the world utterly secure. Katsuki caught his eye and smirked, a look of pure, confident disdain. For a fleeting moment, Izel felt a pang of pity for him. Katsuki was the perfect product of a perfect system, a system that Jor-El believed was built on a foundation of denial, teetering on the edge of an abyss. His strength would be useless against a foe that could unmake their entire world. When Izel reached his small, Spartan quarters, the feeling of dread had solidified into a cold, hard certainty. His home was a simple room, functional and bare, its only personal touch being the small pedestal in the corner where he kept his private codex. It was a sunstone, like the ones in the archives, but this one was blank, attuned only to him. It was his. Over the cycles he had filled it with his own observations, analyses of Krypton's greatest heroes and their abilities, tactical breakdowns of historical battles, and theoretical applications of guild technologies. It was his hero analysis for the future, a secret, hopeful project cataloging the greatness he aspired to but could never possess. He picked up the crystal. It felt heavier tonight. He activated it, and the familiar holographic text filled his room. He scrolled past his detailed notes on Admiral Zod's campaigns, past his speculative essays on the psionic abilities of the Artist Guild, past his breakdown of the engineering principles behind the Phantom Drive. None of it mattered now. With a deep breath, he opened a new file. His fingers flew across the holographic interface, not with excitement, but with grim purpose. He began to input the data from Jor-El's observatory, the seismic charts, the energy wave patterns, the horrifying decay of their planet's core. He looked at the title he had created for this collection of heroic deeds, Kryptonian Hero Analysis for the Future. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. What future? He deleted the title. His fingers hovered over the console, the crimson light from his window casting long shadows across the room. He thought of the Council's denial, of Katsuki's blind arrogance, of Jor-El's desperate hope, and of the dying star at the center of their world. A hero saves people. But what do you do when the thing that needs saving is the ground beneath your feet? He typed a new title for the file, a heading for this new, terrible analysis. The words glowed in the dim light, a quiet testament to a boy who saw the cracks in perfection. Analysis for a future. If we have one. Kandor was Krypton's heart, while Argo's city was its mind. Where Argo was a city of stark, soaring spires dedicated to logic and governance, Kandor was a symphony of form and light. Its crystalline structures were not merely functional. They were sculpted, curving in elegant, impossible arcs that captured and refracted Rao's crimson light into 1,000 shades of scarlet and rose. It was the cultural nexus, home to the Artist Guild, the historical conclave, and the grandest public forums on the planet. Izel of the House of Midori found himself in one such forum, the Plaza of Ancient Voices. Though his attention was not on the bustling crowds or the shimmering artistic constructs that drifted through the air like captive nebulae. He was hunched over a public data terminal, its holographic interface casting a soft blue glow on his focused face. The noise of the city, the gentle hum of skiff traffic, the murmur of 1,000 conversations, The melodic chimes that marked the passing of time faded into a distant hum. He was deep in the archives, deeper than he had ever been allowed to go before Jor-El had granted him access. The ancient geological data was a puzzle of staggering complexity. The script was archaic, the sensor readings logged in formats that had been obsolete for millennia. But to Izel, it was a language he was quickly learning to speak. He cross-referenced seismic charts from Krypton's volatile youth with the terrifying energy readings Jor-El had given him, his mind a whirlwind of calculations and pattern recognition. A low, familiar muttering escaped his lips as he worked. The energy decay isn't linear, it's staggered. A cascade failure model doesn't fit. There's a variable missing, an external catalyst. He was so engrossed he didn't notice the young woman from the engineer guild until she let out a frustrated sigh beside him. He glanced up, startled. She had a round, expressive face framed by a short, neat bob of brown hair, and her gray and gold engineer's tunic was smudged with what looked like coolant gel. She was tapping impatiently at the terminal next to his. System lag is at 12%. She grumbled to herself, her brow furrowed. How am I supposed to run a gravimetric stress simulation for the new skyport anchorage with these processing delays? It's like the whole network is heavy. Izel blinked. Heavy? The girl jumped, surprised he had spoken. Oh. Sorry, I was just thinking aloud. I'm Ochako of the House of Ura. And you're the scribe from the training spire, aren't you? Izel? His cheeks warmed slightly. She remembered him, but likely for his pathetic performance. Yes. The network isn't heavy, it's being throttled, he said, his analytical mind taking over before he could feel embarrassed. There's a massive diagnostic query running system-wide. Looks like it's coming from the Science Council's central spire. It's consuming nearly a quarter of the public grid's processing power. Ochako stared at him, her brown eyes wide. How could you possibly know that? The lag isn't random, it's rhythmic. It pulses. The latency spikes correspond with the data packet handshake protocols of a Level 1 planetary diagnostic. He realized he was rambling and stopped himself. You can see the pattern if you look at the system resource monitor. Ochako leaned over, her expression shifting from frustration to fascination as Izel brought up the monitor on his terminal. The complex data stream, a chaotic mess to most, seemed to resolve into a clear, understandable rhythm under his guidance. Incredible, she breathed. I've been fighting with this all cycle. I thought my simulations were corrupted. She gave him a bright, genuine smile that made him feel strangely warm. Thank you, Izel. You just saved me a lot of trouble. Before he could stammer a reply, a new voice, amplified and authoritative, boomed through the plaza. The central communication spire flared to life, projecting a colossal, shimmering hologram of an old, stern-faced Kryptonian in the ornate robes of the council's high seat. It was Lorem, the staunch traditionalist who served as the de facto leader of the Science Council. Greetings, citizens of Candor. Lorem began, his voice dripping with condescending reassurance. We of the Council have heard the whispers of concern, the foolish rumors propagated by those who would sow fear for their own aggrandizement. His eyes, even in holographic form, seemed to bore into Izel. He was talking about Jor-El. Let me be clear. Krypton is eternal. Our world, crafted by the wisdom of our ancestors and protected by the infallible Genesis Chamber, is the pinnacle of stability. The minor solar fluctuations of Rao are no more a threat to us than a whisper is to a mountain. Trust in the system. Trust in your designated functions. Trust in the perfection that is our legacy. The speech was met with polite, conditioned applause. It was the same message they had heard for centuries. Krypton was perfect. Everything was fine. And then the world broke. It started not as a sound, but as a feeling. A low, dissonant vibration that resonated deep in Izel's bones, in the crystal of the city itself. The melodic chimes of the plaza stuttered and went silent. The gentle hum of the skiffs became a stressed groan. Then came the sound. A deep, grinding roar that seemed to rise from the planet's very core. It was a noise of unimaginable pressure and friction, the sound of a world tearing itself apart from the inside. The obsidian floor beneath Izel's feet lurched violently to the left. He was thrown from his seat, landing hard against the base of the data terminal. Around him, the plaza erupted into chaos. Kryptonians, A people who had not known a moment of true, uncontrolled chaos in 10,000 years, stumbled and fell, their faces etched with a shock that was deeper than fear. It was utter disbelief, a fundamental violation of their reality. The sculpted crystal arches above them groaned, hairline fractures racing across their impossibly smooth surfaces like webs of black lightning. The great hologram of Lorem flickered, distorted into a grotesque mask of static, and then vanished. One of the artistic nebulae constructs, its anti-gravity field failing, plummeted from the sky and shattered on the plaza floor in a silent explosion of light and razor-sharp fragments. Izol pushed himself up, his heart hammering against his ribs. His mind, trained for analysis, struggled to process the sensory overload. The grinding roar from below, the screams of the shocked populace, the sight of their perfect city cracking around them. This was no minor geologic instability. This was an apocalypse in miniature. His eyes darted around, looking for Ochako. He spotted her near the edge of the plaza, her gaze fixed upwards in horror. He followed her line of sight and his blood ran cold. A public transport skiff, a large, multi-decked vessel, was caught in the sky lane directly above them. Its own internal stabilizers were fighting against the violent planetary convulsions, and they were losing. The skiff bucked and pitched, its engines whining in protest. A plume of black smoke, a sight so alien on Krypton as to be obscene, erupted from its port side. With a final, sickening lurch, it broke free of the sky lane's magnetic conduit and began to fall. Panic turned to terror in the plaza. Citizens scrambled to get clear, trampling each other in their desperation. The skiff, weighing hundreds of tons, was tumbling end over end, on a direct collision course with the crowded plaza. Ochako didn't run. The young engineer was frozen in place, her datapad clutched in her hand, her face a mask of horrified concentration. She was trying to help, Izol realized. She was trying to remotely interface with the falling skiff, to stabilize it. The gravimetric regulators are offline! She yelled to no one in particular, her fingers flying across her screen. The plasma conduits are fluctuating too wildly. I can't get a lock. Izol's mind, finally cutting through the fog of fear, latched onto her words. Fluctuating. Like the network lag. Like the core readings. It was a pattern. He scrambled to his feet and ran towards her, dodging falling debris and panicked Kryptonians. It's not random! He shouted, his voice nearly lost in the cacophony. Ochako looked at him, her eyes wide with desperation. What? The power fluctuations. They're rhythmic. It's feedback from the planet's magnetic field. He grabbed a discarded public terminal, his hands a blur as he pulled up the skiff's public diagnostic schematics and a live feed of the local magnetosphere readings. Data scrolled across the screen, a chaotic symphony of numbers, but to Izol, it was sheet music. The power surges are peaking every 3.7 seconds. You're trying to counter them at their peak. It's amplifying the failure. He pointed a trembling finger at the screen. Vent plasma on the trough. Just after the peak. Use the system's own recoil to force a temporary equilibrium. Ochako stared at him for a half-second, her mind processing his frantic, data-driven command. A flash of understanding crossed her face. It was a counterintuitive, dangerous maneuver, a controlled explosion to avert a catastrophic one. But it was based on a pattern she hadn't seen. She trusted it. She trusted him. Her fingers moved with newfound purpose, inputting the commands. On the massive skiff tumbling above them, a ventral port hissed open. A brilliant blue stream of plasma vented into the air, not in a continuous stream, but in a precise, timed burst. The skiff shuddered violently, its descent momentarily arrested. Another timed burst. The tumbling slowed. A third, and a fourth. The massive vessel, now only a few hundred feet from the ground, finally stabilized, its emergency anti-gravity thrusters kicking in with a deafening roar. It hung in the air, smoking and damaged, but no longer falling. The grinding tremor from the planet began to subside, the violent shaking replaced by a series of weakening aftershocks. The roar faded back into a low, unsettling hum. In the plaza, the panic screams died down, replaced by stunned silence and ragged gasps. They were alive. Ochako stared up at the stabilized skiff, her chest heaving. Then she turned to look at Izol, her expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. How did you? I just saw the pattern, he said, his own voice trembling from the adrenaline. Before she could respond, the voice of Lorem returned, crackling back to life across the city's damaged comms system. Citizens of Krypton, remain calm. The voice insisted, strained but still arrogant. As I was saying, our world is resilient. The Science Council has determined that this event was the result of a significant, but ultimately harmless, solar flare from Rao interacting with our planet's magnetosphere. Our systems held. Order is being restored. Return to your designated functions. There is nothing to fear. A lie. A bald, staggering, planet-sized lie. Izol stared at the damaged plaza, at the terrified faces of his people, at the smoking transport skiff, and felt a cold, hard anger crystallize in his chest. This wasn't a solar flare. This was a scream from a dying world, and the council was putting its hands over its ears. In the aftermath, a grim and unfamiliar quiet settled over Candor. Clean-up constructs, silent and efficient, began clearing debris while medical teams tended to the injured. But the damage was more than physical. The illusion of Krypton's eternal perfection had been fractured, and no amount of tidying could piece it back together. Izol excused himself from a still grateful Ochako, his mind racing. He had to get back to the archives. He had to prove what had just happened. The lie of the council could not be allowed to stand. He worked with a feverish intensity he had never known. The data from the tremor, the real data, not the sanitized version the council would release, was his Rosetta Stone. He locked himself in a secluded archival chamber, and began the most important analysis of his life. He took the live magnetospheric readings from the tremor, the seismic data, the energy fluctuations from the power grid, and overlaid them all onto the ancient geological charts and Jor-El's core readings. For hours he worked, oblivious to the passage of time. The complex layers of data swirled in the air around him, a storm of numbers and waveforms. He muttered ceaselessly, tracing connections, discarding failed hypotheses, building a new model from the wreckage of the old. And then he saw it. It was a connection so terrifying, so profound, that he felt the air leave his lungs. He had been looking at the tremor as a spike in seismic activity, an eruption of energy from the core. He was wrong. He brought up the core energy readings from the moments leading up to, during, and after the quake. The readings didn't spike. They dipped. During the tremor, the core's energy output had plummeted catastrophically. The seismic event wasn't the planet releasing energy. It was the planet convulsing as a colossal amount of energy was siphoned out of it. The planet wasn't shaking itself apart. Something was sucking it dry. The tremors were merely the death throes that accompanied the feeding. A chart solidified in the air before him, stark and undeniable. A timeline showing a series of small, previously unnoticed energy drains over the past few cycles, culminating in the massive drain that had nearly torn Candor apart. The pattern was clear. The events were getting closer together. The amount of energy being taken was growing exponentially. The destruction of Krypton was not a distant possibility. It was an active, accelerating process. He didn't even stop to gather his things. He downloaded the findings onto his personal datapad and ran. He had to show Jor-El. He had to make someone listen. The transport ride to Jor-El's observatory was a blur. When he arrived, the doors hissed open to reveal the scientist standing before the holographic projection of Krypton's core, his face ashen. He looked as though he hadn't slept in days. Jor-El! Izol gasped, out of breath. The tremor. It wasn't a release of energy, it was a withdrawal. Something is drawing power directly from the core and it's accelerating. Jor-El finished, his voice heavy with grim finality. He turned to face Izol, his eyes filled with a deep, weary sorrow. I know, my boy. I saw it too. He gestured to the main display, which showed the same horrifying data Izol had just compiled. The tremor wasn't a symptom, it was an event. A step in a process. Whatever is doing this just took a massive drink from our world, and in doing so, it has destabilized the core beyond the point of recovery. The chain reaction is now irreversible. Jor-El placed a hand on Izol's shoulder, the gesture meant to be comforting but feeling more like the weight of a shared burden. You have confirmed my worst fears, Izol. The Council's lies have just condemned us all. We are no longer measuring the future of Krypton in millennia or centuries. We are measuring it in weeks. Perhaps less. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp as crystal shards. Weeks. The end was not coming. It was here. A desperate, irrational thought seized Izel. He had to warn people. He had to try, even if they wouldn't listen. He had to try. The military guild, Izel said, his voice strained. Katsuki's family, they have influence. If they could see the data, if they understood the threat, Jor-El gave him a look of profound pity. Their function is to fight threats they can see, Izel. They cannot punch a planet's failing core. Their pride is as blind as the Council's denial, but you have a good heart. Go. Try. You must see the truth of our people for yourself. He found Katsuki where he always was after a disruption, in the military guild's main training deck, reasserting his dominance. He was in the center of a combat ring, sparring with 3 other cadets at once. He moved with a brutal, efficient grace, his power on full display, as if to personally erase the memory of the planet's momentary weakness with his own overwhelming strength. He sent the last opponent flying from the ring with a powerful kick and stood, chest heaving, a sneer of triumph on his face. Is that all? He roared to the assembled cadets. The planet has one little shudder and you all forget how to fight? Pathetic! Izel felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach, but he pushed it down. This was more important than his pride, more important than his fear of being humiliated. He walked to the edge of the ring, his datapad clutched in his hand. Katsuki! He called out, his voice sounding small and thin in the vast chamber. Katsuki turned, and his triumphant sneer curdled into a look of utter contempt. What do you want, scribe? Come to bore me with another one of your theories? This isn't a theory, Izel insisted, stepping forward. He held up the datapad, its screen glowing with the chart showing the energy drain. The tremor wasn't a solar flare. The planet is dying, the core is being drained. It's collapsing. You have to listen to me. We don't have much time. The other cadets began to snicker. Katsuki's face darkened, his fists clenching. He strode to the edge of the ring and vaulted over the railing, landing heavily in front of Izel. He was a full head taller, a wall of muscle and arrogance. The planet is dying? Katsuki repeated, his voice dangerously low. Is that the latest piece of treasonous filth your master Jor-El has been feeding you? It's the truth. The data proves it. Izel pleaded, shoving the datapad forward. Just look. Katsuki didn't even glance at the screen. He backhanded the datapad from Izel's grasp, sending it clattering across the floor. I don't need your scribbled nonsense. He spat, his crimson eyes blazing with fury. Our leaders, the council, they said it was a solar flare. The generals of my guild agree. Are you calling them all fools? Are you calling my father a fool? They're wrong. They're all wrong. Izel's voice cracked with desperation. That was the final trigger. With a roar of rage, Katsuki grabbed the front of Izel's tunic and slammed him backward against the cold, unyielding metal of the chamber wall. The impact knocked the wind out of him, his head cracking against the surface. Stars exploded behind his eyes. Listen to me, you worthless little flaw! Katsuki snarled, his face inches from Izel's, his breath hot with anger. You are nothing. A genetic misfire. You spend your life hiding in your scrolls and whispers because you're too weak to be a real Kryptonian. You are just spreading these lies because it's the only way a pathetic creature like you can get attention. He shoved Izel hard, and the smaller boy crumpled to the floor, gasping for air, his body aching. Stay out of my way, Katsuki warned, towering over him. And stop spreading your poison. The next time, I won't be so gentle. He turned and stalked back to his fawning audience, leaving Izel alone on the cold floor. Izel pushed himself up, his whole body trembling. It wasn't just from the pain, it was from the crushing, absolute certainty of their doom. He had tried to help during the tremor, and he had succeeded. He had saved a transport full of people. He had felt, for one brief moment, like a hero. He had tried to help now, to warn the strongest person he knew, and he had been beaten down and dismissed as a liar. He retrieved his datapad. The screen was cracked. He looked at the data glowing beneath the fractures, the silent, screaming proof of their extinction. He had the truth. He had the answers, but it didn't matter. In a world that worshipped strength, his voice was too quiet, and his truth was too weak to be heard. The journey back to Jor-El's observatory was a silent pilgrimage of defeat. Izal cradled his cracked datapad as if it were a broken bone, the jagged lines across the screen a perfect mirror of his fractured hope. The ache in his back where he'd hit the wall was a dull, rhythmic reminder of Katsuki's contempt. It was one thing to be dismissed. It was another to be assaulted for daring to present the truth. He had offered them a life raft, and they had tried to drown him for it. When the transport doors hissed open, Jor-El was waiting. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. The scientist's weary eyes took in Izal's disheveled state, the cracked datapad, and the profound despair etched onto the boy's face. He simply placed a steadying hand on Izal's shoulder and guided him inside. Pride is the last and most formidable fortress of a dying culture, Izal, Jor-El said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to fill the vast, dark space of the observatory. It is easier for them to strike the messenger than to face the message. I am sorry you had to learn that so brutally. Izal couldn't find the words to respond. He just nodded, sinking into an observation chair. The great holographic globe of Krypton pulsed ominously in the center of the room, a dying heart in a cage of crystal and steel. The angry yellow and orange veins within its core seemed more pronounced than before, more virulent. It changes nothing, Izal finally whispered, his voice hoarse. My failure. It doesn't change the data. No, Jor-El agreed, his gaze fixed on the globe. It does not. And that is why we cannot afford despair. He magnified the image, focusing on the chaotic energy signature of the core. The Council's explanation of a solar flare is a fantasy. Nature, even at its most violent, has rules. It has a rhythm. A supernova, a planetary collision, a solar flare, they all leave a recognizable energy footprint. This, he gestured to the erratic, jagged waveforms flickering on a nearby screen. This is different. Izal's analytical mind, a drowning man clinging to a piece of driftwood, latched onto the problem. He pushed aside the pain and the humiliation, his focus narrowing to the familiar comfort of data. It's artificial, he breathed, the realization dawning on him. The energy drain isn't a natural process. The wave patterns, they're too clean, too structured. There are harmonics in the decay signature that can only be produced by a containment field of immense power. My conclusion precisely, Jor-El confirmed, a grim satisfaction in his tone. The tremor that struck Kanda was not an earthquake. It was an excavation. Something is deliberately and intelligently mining our planet's core for energy. We are not dying of natural causes, Izal. We are being murdered. The word hung in the air, colder and sharper than the void of space outside the observatory dome. Murdered. It reframed everything. This wasn't a tragedy. It was an atrocity. A cold, calculated act of destruction. But who? Izal asked, his mind racing. What technology could do this? Our own power generators are advanced, but to tap a planetary core directly, it's a scale of energy manipulation that has been theoretical for millennia. No one on Krypton has that capability. No one on Krypton, perhaps, Jor-El said, his voice lowering. He moved to the main archival interface, his fingers dancing across the crystalline controls. But our history is long, and not all of it is taught in the creches. Our pursuit of perfection was born from an age of terrible ambition. An age of heresy. The console shimmered, and the star charts and planetary models were replaced by a restricted access gateway. The symbol of the High Council glowed on the screen, barring entry. Archives classified, level Omega. The Council has expunged the records of our greatest failures, believing that to erase the memory of a mistake is to prevent it from happening again. Jor-El explained. But they did not destroy them. They merely locked them away in a digital oubliette. He produced a small, multifaceted crystal key from within his robes. A key I was given when I first joined the Council, and one I was never supposed to use without their unanimous consent. He pressed the key to the console. The gateway dissolved, and a torrent of corrupted files, redacted documents, and forbidden histories flooded the screen. This was the Phantom Archive, the repository of everything Krypton wanted to forget. Izal, Jor-El commanded, his tone urgent. Your mind is faster at this than mine. Search these records. Look for any project, any individual, associated with large-scale, unconventional energy sourcing. Look for containment fields, for planetary engineering, for anything that matches the signature we are seeing. This was Izol's element. The shame and fear melted away, replaced by the pure, cold thrill of the hunt. He interfaced his own datapad, the cracked screen flickering but functional, with the main console. He was a scribe diving into the ultimate forbidden library. His consciousness plunged into the chaotic data stream, his mind sifting through millennia of secrets at a speed no ordinary Kryptonian could comprehend. He saw fragments of horrifying truths. Records of early genetic experiments that resulted in monstrous creatures, quickly euthanized and erased from history. Blueprints for weapons that could crack moons, philosophical treatises arguing for the forced evolution of their species. It was the collected darkness in the soul of a people who pretended they had no soul, only function. And then he found a recurring term, a ghost in the machine. It appeared in heavily redacted military reports and the sealed testimony of long-dead scientists. Project Chimera. Every mention was linked to research into cellular absorption and forbidden genetic transference. The project had been deemed a perversion, an ultimate violation of the sanctity of the Genesis Codex, and its lead scientist had been declared a heretic. Jor-El, Izol said, his voice tense. Project Chimera. Its goal was to break the shackles of the Genesis chamber by allowing a Kryptonian to absorb the unique genetic traits of others, to combine abilities, to hoard strength. Jor-El's face went pale under Rao's crimson light. I have heard whispers of that name. A myth. A cautionary tale told to young scientists. I never believed it was real. It was real, Izol confirmed, his fingers flying as he bypassed another layer of encryption. And the lead scientist, his name is almost completely purged, but I found a single, unredacted cross-reference in a star chart log from the era, a name solidified on the screen, stark and chilling. The Oriel-Duex of the House of Dox, and beneath it, a designation that made Izol's blood run cold. Status, exiled. Destination, Phantom Zone. A heavy, oppressive silence fell over the observatory. The Phantom Zone was the ultimate punishment, a fate considered worse than death. It was a non-dimension, a plane of shadow and thought where convicts existed as disembodied, immortal consciousnesses, drifting forever in a silent, featureless void. It was Krypton's greatest, most terrible secret. Vrildox. Jor-El repeated the name like a curse. He was a contemporary of our great reformers, from the last age before the Genesis chamber was fully implemented. He was a genius, perhaps the greatest scientific mind of his generation. But his ambition was boundless. He saw the strictures of the guilds, the concept of a single designated function, as a genetic prison. He believed Krypton was deliberately limiting itself, creating a monoculture that was doomed to stagnation. Jor-El brought up a hidden historical file, one that must have been a part of his own private collection. A single, grainy image of a Kryptonian appeared. He was tall and regal, with piercing, intelligent eyes that held a fanatic's gleam. He developed a technology that could rewrite a being at the cellular level. Jor-El continued, his voice grim. He could not only copy genetic traits, but steal them entirely, adding them to his own physiology. He saw it as the next step in evolution. He began with animals, then moved to his own research assistants, those who volunteered. But soon, volunteering was not enough. He began to hunt those with unique biological markers, a warrior with superior bone density, a thinker with enhanced synaptic speed, an artist with heightened sensory perception. He collected them, he absorbed them. The people started calling him the Collector. Izol stared at the image, at the man who wanted to become a god by consuming his people. It was a philosophy of absolute, predatory self-interest. It was all for one. They stopped him, of course, Jor-El said. An alliance of the early guilds. But they could not kill him. He had absorbed the regenerative abilities of a rare Kryptonian beast, so they built a prison from which there could be no physical escape. They projected his consciousness into the Phantom Zone, where he has drifted in silence and shadow for centuries. Until now, Izol whispered, the final pieces of the puzzle locking into place with a horrifying click. The technology, the energy drain, it's him, it must be. Jor-El agreed. The Phantom Zone is a realm of thought, not matter. In his centuries of isolation, his mind, untethered from physical constraints, must have evolved. He would have had nothing to do but think, to plan, to reach out with his consciousness. Isol's eyes widened as the full, monstrous scale of the collector's plan became clear. He's not just reaching out. He's been whispering. He must have found a way to interface with our planetary data network from his non-dimension. Subtly. Slowly. A line of code here, a corrupted sensor reading there. He didn't just predict the core's instability, Jor-El, he caused it. He's been poisoning our world for decades, a slow-acting catalyst, preparing it for this moment. The horrifying truth settled over them. They weren't just being murdered, they were being harvested. The dying core was not a tragedy for the collector, it was a power source. He is using the cataclysmic energy of our planet's death throes as a battery. Jor-El concluded, his voice trembling with a mixture of horror and awe at the sheer audacity of the plan. He is powering some kind of engine. Something that can tear a hole between his prison and our reality. It's more than that, Isol said, looking at the data from the candid tremor. The energy drain wasn't raw. It was focused, shaped. He targeted the area around the city. He wasn't just drawing power. He looked at Jor-El, his eyes wide with a new, specific terror. He has a ship. An Arkansas. He's not trying to escape from a dying Krypton. He wants to escape with it. Or at least, with the parts he values. He's a collector, you said? He's not going to leave his collection behind. He's going to steal our cities, our technology, our Genesis data. He's going to bottle Krypton before it shatters. The image was so monstrous, so bizarre, that it was utterly believable. A phantom god, reaching out from his ethereal prison to pluck his favorite toys from a dying world before it was consumed by fire. He wouldn't save Krypton. He would curate its corpse. For a long moment, the two of them stood in silence, dwarfed by the scale of the evil they had uncovered. This was a truth that would shatter what was left of Kryptonian society. It was a monster from a forgotten age, a heretic from their history's darkest chapter, returned to claim them all. The council must be told, Jor-El said, his voice regaining a sliver of its usual resolve. Even they, in their arrogance, cannot ignore this. A direct threat from the Phantom Zone, proof of the heretic Vildox. This changes everything. They won't listen to you, Isol said bleakly. They'll call you a fearmonger. They'll call me a liar. They'll seal the archives and double down on their denial. You are right, Jor-El conceded. They will not listen to me. But there is one on the council they might still respect. A voice that carries the weight of history and the echo of our former greatness. A man who still believes in hope. Isol knew instantly who he meant. There was only one figure on Krypton who fit that description. A legend whose deeds were taught alongside the great heroes of old, a symbol of Krypton's potential. Tornori of the House of Yagi. They found Tornori not in his laboratory or his council chambers, but in the Hall of Heroes, a vast, circular chamber at the base of the central spire. The domed ceiling was a mosaic of glowing constellations, and the walls were lined with life-size statues of Krypton's greatest figures, their deeds immortalized in silent, stoic crystal. The air was cool and still, heavy with the reverence of ages. Tornori stood before the statue of his own ancestor, a hero from the expansionist era who was said to have moved a rogue moon with his bare hands to save a fledgling colony. Even standing still, Tornori was an imposing figure. He was built on a scale that made even other Kryptonians seem small, his shoulders as wide as a doorway, his frame a mountain of muscle honed by a lifetime in the Science Guild's more hazardous, exploratory divisions. His blonde hair was swept back, and two prominent tufts framed his face like the horns of some great, noble beast. But it was his face that truly set him apart. Where most Kryptonians wore a mask of serene, emotionless composure, Tornori's face was an open book. His brow was furrowed with concern, but his bright blue eyes held a deep, unshakable warmth. When he smiled, which was often, it seemed to generate its own light in the dim hall. He was the living embodiment of Krypton's strength, tempered by a compassion their society had long ago deemed inefficient. He turned as they approached, and a genuine, welcoming smile spread across his features. Jor-El. And young Izal. It is good to see you both, though I suspect this is no social visit. I wish it were, old friend, Jor-El said, his voice grave. Tonori's smile faded, replaced by a look of deep concern. He gestured for them to walk with him, his footsteps echoing softly on the polished floor. I heard about the events in Kandor, and I heard Lorem's predictable explanation. Tell me what you have found. They stopped in the center of the hall, surrounded by the silent judgment of Krypton's dead heroes. Jor-El laid out the findings with clinical precision: the artificial nature of the energy drain, the discovery of the Phantom Archives, the forbidden history of Rildox, the Collector. As Jor-El spoke, Izal watched Tonori's face. The warmth in his eyes was slowly extinguished, replaced by a dawning horror. The color drained from his face, and the great muscles in his jaw tightened. He did not interrupt. He listened with an intensity that seemed to absorb every word. When Jor-El finished, Izal stepped forward, his cracked datapad in his hands. Councilman, he began, his voice trembling slightly. The Collector's plan, it's not just to escape. We believe he is using the core to power a vessel, an Arkansas. He intends to preserve pieces of Krypton for his collection. We think the tremor in Kandor was a test, a preliminary step before he attempts to steal the entire city. Tonori stared at the data on Izal's screen, at the horrifying, logical progression of the Heretic's plan. He looked from the boy to Jor-El, and then up at the silent crystal heroes surrounding them. For a long moment he said nothing, his massive chest rising and falling in a deep, controlled breath. The hubris, Tonori finally said, his voice a low, dangerous growl that seemed to vibrate in the very air. The utter, absolute hubris of our council. They were so obsessed with purging our past failures that they left us blind to their return. He looked down at Izal, and for the first time, the boy saw something other than warmth in his eyes. He saw a flash of the incredible power that made Tonori a legend, a fury as vast and as potent as a star. It was the righteous anger of a genuinely good man confronted with an incomprehensible evil. They created this monster through their own arrogance. Tonori continued, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. First, the ancient council who chose to imprison him rather than find a cure, then this council, who chose to forget him rather than learn from his evil. And now he returns, a phantom born of our own denial, to feast on our world. He took a deep, steadying breath, the fury receding, replaced by a grim resolve. You were right to come to me, Jor-El. This information cannot be ignored. Will you present it to them? Jor-El asked, a sliver of hope in his voice. Your voice carries weight. They respect you, even if they disagree with your ideals. Tonori looked weary, the weight of his conviction settling upon his broad shoulders. I will, he promised. I will take this evidence, your impeccable research, and your brilliant analysis, young Izal, and I will force them to see the truth. I will stand before them and be the symbol of hope they claim to revere, and I will demand they act. He paused, and his gaze met theirs, his blue eyes filled with a sad wisdom. But I must warn you, he said, his voice losing its powerful timbre, becoming quieter, more somber. Do not mistake their respect for a willingness to listen. The members of that council are old. They are set in their ways. They built their entire world, their entire philosophy, on the idea of Krypton's infallibility. To accept your truth, they must first accept that their entire lives have been predicated on a lie. He looked up at the stone-faced heroes around them. They fear the unknown more than they fear oblivion. The thought of a monster from their past, a ghost from a fairy tale, may be so terrifying to them that they will choose to embrace the end rather than admit they were wrong. Be prepared for that. The sliver of hope in Izal's chest flickered. Tonori would fight for them. He would be their champion. But he was warning them that it might not be enough. Even a legend could be outvoted by a committee of fools. Whatever they decide, Tonori said, his voice regaining its strength, his resolve hardening into diamond. We will not stand idle. If the council will not act to save Krypton, then we will. He placed one massive, heavy hand on Jor-El's shoulder, and the other on Izal's. In that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of heroes past, the three of them, the heretical visionary, the legendary symbol, and the flawed, brilliant boy, formed a silent, desperate alliance against the coming darkness. They were three whispers of truth against a world determined to die in denial. The High Council Chamber of Krypton was a place designed to intimidate. It was not a room for debate, but a cathedral for pronouncements. Located at the absolute apex of Argos City's central spire, it was a perfect, crystalline hemisphere that offered a panoramic, God's-eye view of the world below. Rao, the ancient red sun, hung in the sky like a drop of blood on black velvet, its light refracted through the dome into 1,000 solemn, crimson beams that striped the polished obsidian floor. At the chamber's center was a raised dais where 12 high-backed chairs, carved from a single, flawless crystal, were arranged in a severe semicircle. This was the seat of power, the place where the infallible will of Krypton's destiny was interpreted and enforced. The air itself seemed heavy, thick with the weight of tradition and the suffocating certainty of millennia. Izal had never felt so small in his life. He stood beside Jor-El in the designated petitioner's circle, a space of floor set slightly lower than the rest of the chamber. He felt like a specimen under a microscope. His simple scribe's tunic felt threadbare and insignificant compared to the ornate, heavy robes of the council members. He clutched his data pad, its cracked screen a stark symbol of his own perceived inadequacy in this temple of perfection. 10 of the 12 chairs were occupied. 2 were empty, their vacancies a silent testament to recent political retirements that the council, in its glacial pace, had yet to fill. The faces arrayed before him were a gallery of Kryptonian antiquity. Old, stern, and unyielding, they were the products of a system designed to weed out radicalism and reward conformity. Their expressions were uniformly impassive, masks of serene authority that betrayed no hint of emotion. At the center, in the most ornate chair, sat Lorem. His face, a web of fine lines and deep-set wrinkles, was a study in aristocratic disdain. He looked down at Jor-El and Izal not as colleagues or fellow citizens, but as a tedious interruption to his otherwise orderly day. The 12th Kryptonian, seated to Lorem's right, was Tornori. He was the only one who seemed truly alive in the room. He sat forward in his massive chair, his powerful frame coiled like a spring, his blue eyes radiating an intensity that was a stark contrast to the placid detachment of his peers. He gave Jor-El and Izal a single, almost imperceptible nod, a small gesture of solidarity in this lion's den. "Councilman Jor-El," Lorem began, his voice dry as ancient dust. "You have invoked the right of imminent peril to demand this emergency session. A right not utilized in over 500 years. This suggests a threat of the highest magnitude. The council is assembled. Present your peril. The word was laced with a palpable sarcasm. Jor-El stepped forward, his posture erect, his face a mask of grim determination. He did not seem intimidated by the chamber or its occupants. He was a scientist, and he had come armed with data, the only weapon he truly trusted. "High Seat Lorem, esteemed members of the council," Jor-El began, his voice echoing in the cavernous chamber. "I come before you not with theories but with proof. The event in Candor was not a solar flare. It was a symptom of a terminal illness, an illness that has been deliberately inflicted upon our world." He activated the central holographic projector. The image of Krypton's dying core filled the space between them and the council, its sickly, pulsating light a stark and ugly truth in the pristine chamber. "Our planet is being systematically destroyed. Its core is being drained of energy by an artificial, hostile intelligence." A murmur, like the rustling of dry leaves, passed through the council members. Lorem held up a hand for silence, his expression unchanged. "We have reviewed your previous, alarmist reports, Jor-El. You have a penchant for melodrama. What makes you believe this fantasy is any different from your last?" "Because we have identified the source of the attack," Jor-El stated, his voice ringing with conviction. "The technology being used, the unique energy signature, it corresponds to a dark chapter in our own history. A chapter you yourselves have sealed away." Jor-El gestured to Izal. "With the aid of Izal of the House of Midori, a scribe of exceptional analytical talent, we have breached the Omega-level archives. The data is unequivocal." Now there were gasps. Breaching the Omega archives without council authority was an act of high treason. Izal felt a dozen pairs of cold, ancient eyes fix upon him, and his blood ran cold. He felt Tornori's gaze on him as well, but his was filled with encouragement. Be brave, boy. With a trembling hand, Izol stepped forward and interfaced his datapad with the main projector. His own cracked screen was mirrored in the giant hologram, a flaw projected for all the architects of perfection to see. He brought up the forbidden files, the redacted history of Project Chimera, and the name of its heretical creator. Vrildox, Jor-El announced, the name echoing like a blasphemy in the sacred chamber. The Collector, exiled to the Phantom Zone centuries ago. He has found a way to interact with our dimension. He is the architect of our destruction. He is using our dying world as a power source to facilitate his return and, we believe, to steal our cities and our knowledge before the end. The chamber fell into a profound, deathly silence. The only sound was the faint, almost subliminal hum of the city far below. The council members stared at the image of the Collector, at the forbidden data scrolling beside it. For the first time, their masks of placid authority seemed to crack. Izol saw flickers of shock, of disbelief, and underneath it all, a primal, undeniable fear. A ghost from their bedtime stories had just been proven real. Lorem was the first to recover. He looked not at the data, but at Jor-El, his eyes narrowing into slits of pure venom. You have committed an unforgivable crime, Jor-El. You have unsealed our most dangerous secrets. You have brought a child into this circus of fear. And you have invoked the name of a long-dead man to support your apocalyptic fantasies. The data does not lie, Jor-El countered, his voice rising with passion. Look at the energy signatures. They are a perfect match for the theoretical models in Vrildox's own research notes. This is not a fantasy. It is a convenient narrative. Another council member, a gaunt woman from the Law Guild, interjected. You have been predicting doom for cycles, Jor-El. When your predictions failed to materialize, you have simply invented a more elaborate monster to justify your failures. Invented? Izol found his voice, a reedy, nervous sound that was nonetheless clear in the silence. The patterns are there. The energy drain corresponds precisely with the activation of a phantom phase containment field. The harmonic resonance is identical to the schematics for Silence, scribe! Lorem snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. You are a child of a minor house. You have no place speaking here. Your function is to observe and record, not to interpret. You have been manipulated by this fearmonger. Izol flinched as if struck, stepping back into Jor-El's shadow. The humiliation was a physical blow, sharp and stinging. He had presented irrefutable proof, and they had dismissed him based on his social standing. That is enough, Lorem. A new voice boomed, cutting through the tension. Tornori rose from his seat. He seemed to grow in stature, his massive frame filling the space beside the high seat. He was no longer a passive observer. He was a force of nature. The other council members visibly recoiled from the sheer power of his presence. You have seen the data, Tornori said, his voice low and dangerous. He swept his gaze across the faces of his colleagues, and none could meet his eye. You have heard the logical, scientific conclusions presented by one of our finest minds. And your response is to insult a child and attack the character of the man who brought you the warning? Is this the wisdom of the Kryptonian High Council? Or the petulant fear of old men who cannot bear to be wrong? He took a step down from the dais, moving to stand beside Jor-El and Izol, a clear and defiant statement of his allegiance. The three of them now faced the 11 remaining council members. For generations, Tornori continued, his voice swelling with a righteous fury that made the very crystals of the chamber seem to vibrate. We have told our people that they are perfect, that our system is infallible, that our world is eternal. We have wrapped ourselves in the comforting blanket of these lies, and we have gone to sleep. But the universe does not care for our comfort. A wolf is at the door, a wolf of our own making, and you choose to argue about the color of the curtains. He turned his blazing blue eyes on Lorem. Vrildox is real. The threat is real. The end is real. We must act. We must begin a planet-wide evacuation. We must build an Exodus fleet. We must repurpose the Genesis chamber to create cryoarcs, to preserve our people. We must give them a chance to survive. We must give them hope. His speech was magnificent. It was a call to arms, a plea for the very soul of their people. Izol felt a surge of adrenaline, of fierce, defiant hope. He had seen the heroes in the Sunstone Chronicles. Tornori was one of them, brought to life. He had spoken. How could they possibly deny him? Lorem stared at Tornori, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. When he spoke, his voice was deceptively calm. Your sentiment is noted, Councilman Yagi. Your flair for the dramatic, as always, is impressive. He turned his attention back to the rest of the council. Let us consider what is being proposed. An evacuation. An admission to our people that everything we have ever told them is a lie, that their designated functions are meaningless, that their perfect society is a fragile shell on the verge of annihilation. This would not create hope, it would create chaos. Panic. Anarchy. The collapse of our civilization long before the planet itself expires. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. And what of this threat? Vrildox. A heretic from a primitive age, trapped for centuries in a non-dimension. The idea that he could orchestrate this is absurd. It is far more likely that Jor-El, in his obsession, has found two unrelated sets of data and has forced them into a narrative that fits his doomsday scenario. That is a deliberate misinterpretation of the evidence. Jor-El protested. It is a rational interpretation, free of hysteria. Lorem countered smoothly. The core is unstable. That is a geological eventuality we have always known was a distant possibility. We will dedicate resources to reinforcing our city's energy shields and structural integrity. We will weather this period of instability as we have weathered all challenges, with calm, order, and faith in the systems that have protected us for millennia. He looked directly at Tornori, a smug, triumphant light in his ancient eyes. To build an evacuation fleet would be an act of treason. It would be an admission of failure. It would be a surrender to fear. Krypton will not run. We will endure. Or we will meet our destiny with the dignity befitting our race. It was a masterful piece of political maneuvering. He had reframed their warning not as a call to action, but as an act of cowardice. He had painted survival as a betrayal of their cultural identity. We must put it to a vote, the gaunt woman from the Law Guild said. Does the Council acknowledge the existence of an external, intelligent threat as presented by Councilman Jor-El? Tornori's face was a stony mask of disbelief. You cannot be serious. You are voting on whether to accept reality? We are voting on whether to plunge our entire civilization into chaos based on the frantic interpretation of a disgraced scientist and a child. Lorem corrected him. Let the Council decide. All who accept this phantom menace as truth, signal your assent. The room was silent. Jor-El, Izol, and Tornori watched the 11 figures on the dais. One by one, Izol's hope crumbled into dust. Not a single hand was raised. Not one. Some looked away, unable to meet Tornori's furious gaze. Others simply stared ahead, their faces impassive. They had chosen their comfortable lie over the terrifying truth. They would rather die as perfect, orderly Kryptonians than live as panicked, chaotic refugees. Lorem allowed himself a small, cruel smile. The motion is rejected. The findings of Councilman Jor-El are officially dismissed as unsubstantiated theory. He then turned his cold gaze on Jor-El, and his voice became hard as diamond. Furthermore, for the act of breaching the Omega Archives, for inciting public alarm, and for defying the direct edicts of this council, you, Jor-El of the House of El, are hereby stripped of your public titles and privileges. You are confined to your personal laboratory and observatory until such time as this council deems you are no longer a threat to the stability of this world. Do you understand? Jor-El stood, defeated. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a profound, hollow emptiness. I understand, he said, his voice barely a whisper. And you, Tornori? Lorem continued, turning to the last bastion of hope. You are formally censured for your part in this disruption. You will retain your seat, but you are warned. Any further support for this heresy will result in your immediate expulsion from this council. Tornori stared at Lorem, and for a moment, Izol thought he might physically attack the high seat. A low growl rumbled in his chest, and the air around him seemed to crackle with contained power. But then, he looked at Jor-El's defeated face, and at Izol's terrified one. He took a deep, shuddering breath, reining in his fury. He had lost. They had all lost. He said nothing. He simply turned, his magnificent robes swirling around him, and strode from the chamber. His silence was more damning than any shout could have been. Lorem's attention finally fell on Izel. The boy felt pinned by the old man's gaze, a bug under a thumb. As for the scribe, Lorem said dismissively, he is a child. He has been led astray. His datapad and his access to the main archives are hereby confiscated. He will return to his menial duties. Let this be a lesson to you, boy. Know your function. Stay in your place. Great matters are not the concern of little minds. The dismissal was absolute. It wasn't just a rejection of his data. It was a rejection of his very being. He was nothing. A flaw. A footnote. Guards from the Law Guild, silent and imposing in their black and silver armor, stepped forward. One gently took the datapad from Izel's numb fingers. Another escorted a stone-faced Jor-El from the chamber, leading him toward his new prison. Izel was left alone in the petitioner's circle, the crimson light of the dying sun bathing him in the color of failure. The council had already moved on, their voices a low drone as they began discussing some trivial matter of resource allocation for a new arts festival in Candor. They were arranging the flowers for their own funeral. He felt a crushing, suffocating despair, a familiar weight settling back onto his soul. It was the same feeling he'd had in the training spire, the same feeling he'd had when Katsuki had slammed him against the wall. He had tried. He had done everything right. He had found the truth, analyzed the data, and presented it logically. He had stood with the wisest man he knew and the strongest man on the planet. And it had meant nothing. The system was too powerful. The denial was too absolute. His quirklessness, his fundamental inadequacy in this world, had once again rendered him useless. He turned and walked from the chamber, his footsteps making no sound on the obsidian floor. He was invisible. A ghost leaving a room full of corpses who refused to admit they were dead. The hope that Tornori had ignited in him had been utterly and completely extinguished, leaving behind nothing but the cold, black ash of certainty. Krypton was doomed, and no one in power cared enough to even try and stop it. The silence in Jor-El's observatory was no longer the quiet of scholarly contemplation. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. The Law Guild guards had escorted Jor-El back to his spire, their final duty to ensure the magnetic seals on the transport access and communication arrays were locked. They hadn't been hostile. Their movements were detached, efficient, as if they were merely calibrating a piece of faulty equipment. Jor-El was not a prisoner to be punished, but a variable to be contained. Now, he and Izel stood before the great holographic globe of Krypton, two mourners at a deathbed. The planet's sickly, pulsating light painted their faces in hues of fever and decay. The grand pronouncements in the council chamber, the arrogant denials of Lorem, the silent, damning vote, it all faded away, leaving only the horrifying, inescapable truth rotating slowly before them. Izel felt hollowed out, a vessel scoured clean of hope and purpose. He had poured every ounce of his intellect, his courage, and his conviction into that presentation, and it had shattered against a wall of willful ignorance. Lorem's final words echoed in his mind, a cruel mantra of his own inadequacy. Great matters are not the concern of little minds. He finally broke the silence, his voice barely a whisper, thin and brittle. He was right. I was a fool to think someone like me could make a difference. Jor-El turned from the dying world to look at the boy. The scientist's face was etched with a profound weariness, the lines around his eyes deeper than they had been a mere cycle ago, but in their depths, a faint ember of defiance still glowed. Do not ever believe that, Izel, Jor-El said, his voice firm, cutting through the boy's despair. Do not let those blind, terrified old men define your worth. What they did in that chamber was not a judgment on you or your mind. It was a reflection of their own cowardice. They did not reject your data. They rejected the future it represented, because they are men who live only in the past. He sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of a world. But their denial changes the equation. I had hoped to save our people. That is no longer possible. The time for persuasion is over. The time we have left, we must use it for a different purpose. A new energy entered Jor-El's voice, a shift from weary resignation to grim, focused resolve. He walked to a section of the observatory wall that appeared to be nothing more than smooth, seamless crystal. He placed his palm against it, and a low hum resonated through the room. A hidden panel slid open, revealing not a console or a data port, but a single, unmarked sunstone resting on a pedestal. It was old, its facets cloudy with age, and it pulsed with a faint, internal light. "This is the first stone of the House of El," Jor-El explained. "It contains the private history of my lineage, our secret works, our unsanctioned theories, our heresies. It is the one archive the Council does not know exists." He took the stone and placed it on the main console. The holographic globe of Krypton dissolved, replaced by a swirling vortex of ancient data. Blueprints, star charts, and complex equations filled the air. Isol's analytical mind, starved for a problem to solve, latched onto the new information, his despair momentarily forgotten. "These designs," Isol breathed, his eyes wide. "They are for a star drive. An experimental hyperlight engine. But the power requirements are astronomical. And the navigation system is purely theoretical. It's never been built." "Not entirely," Jor-El corrected him. He led Isol to the far side of the observatory, to a massive, curved wall that had always seemed to be part of the spire's structure. He placed his hand on this wall as well, and with a deep groan of ancient machinery, the entire section retracted, sliding away to reveal a cavernous, hidden chamber. Isol stepped forward and gasped. It was a secret hangar, carved into the very peak of the spire. And suspended in the center, held by humming anti-gravity emitters, was a ship. It was unlike any Kryptonian vessel he had ever seen. It was small, barely large enough for a single pilot, and its design was sleek, alien, and organic. It looked less like a machine and more like a metallic seed, a chrysalis of polished silver alloy. Wires and diagnostic conduits snaked from its hull to a series of power regulators lining the hangar walls. It was a prototype, a beautiful, unfinished dream. "My great-grandfather was a dreamer," Jor-El said softly, his voice filled with a mixture of reverence and sorrow. "He believed Krypton's destiny was not to remain tethered to Rao, but to explore the stars. He designed this ship, the Star Drive one, and this engine in secret. The Council of his day discovered his work and declared it a violation of our isolationist mandate. They branded him a heretic and ordered his work destroyed. He complied, officially." Jor-El ran a hand along the cool, smooth hull of the ship. "But he preserved the blueprints and the prototype engine core in the first stone. I found them when I was no older than you, and for the last 10 years, ever since I first saw the instability in Krypton's core, I have been building this. In secret. As a contingency. A last resort, a ship to escape." Isol realized, the sheer scale of Jor-El's foresight stunning him. "Not for me," Jor-El said, turning to face him. "For our legacy. I told you I could no longer save our people. But we can still save our culture. Our knowledge. Our potential. We can save the idea of Krypton." He gestured back towards the main console, where the data from the first stone still swirled. "This ship is small. It can only carry one passenger. An infant, to be precise. Its life support systems are designed for the minimal metabolic rate of a Kryptonian baby in cryostasis." Suddenly the full, heartbreaking scope of Jor-El's plan crashed down on Isol. This wasn't an escape plan. It was an arc, a message in a bottle thrown into the cosmic ocean, carrying the last survivor of a drowned world. The weight of it was immense, a burden of grief so profound it was almost physical. "But the ship alone is not enough," Jor-El continued, his voice hardening with purpose. "A child alone on a new world would be just that, a lost child. It needs a guide. It needs our knowledge." He brought up another file, and the image of a massive, impossibly complex crystalline matrix appeared. "This is the complete Kryptonian Codex, the sum total of all our history, science, art, and philosophy, stored in the central archives. More than that, it contains the full genetic sequence of every great house, every animal, every plant on our world. It is the seed bank of our entire civilization." Isol stared at the data structure. It was the most complex piece of information architecture ever created. The data volume, it's incalculable. To integrate that into the ship's matrix, it would take years. The processing power required is immense. Jor-El finished for him. And that, Izal, is where I need you. Not for your courage, not for your strength, but for that magnificent, analytical mind the council so foolishly dismissed. He fixed Izal with an intense gaze, the last ember of defiance in his eyes now a steady flame. I can fabricate the physical components. I can finish the engine, but I cannot solve the data integration problem alone, not in the time we have left. I need you to find the shortcuts, the compression algorithms, the synaptic pathways to weave the entire soul of our civilization into the memory banks of this ship. I need you to be the architect of our memory. The despair in Izal's chest, the hollow feeling of failure, was suddenly filled with a new, terrifying, and profound purpose. This was a task greater than convincing a stubborn council. This was a sacred duty. Jor-El was asking him to be the scribe for their entire existence, to write the final chapter of Krypton. And there is more, Jor-El said, walking over to a star chart that now dominated the main display. It showed their local cluster, but one star, unremarkable and distant, was circled in gold. I have been searching for a destination. A world that can sustain Kryptonian life. He zoomed in on the golden circle. A planet, blue and white and green, swam into view. It was vibrant, teeming with life. It is a primitive world by our standards, Jor-El explained. Its inhabitants are only just beginning to master their own planet. But its star is the key. He brought up a spectral analysis. It is a yellow sun. A young, G-type main sequence star. My theories have long suggested that a Kryptonian's unique cellular structure, our dense molecular makeup, would react extraordinarily to the higher frequency radiation of a star like this. Our bodies were designed to absorb and process low-level red radiation. Under a yellow sun, the energy intake would be magnified 1,000-fold. He looked at Izal, his eyes gleaming with a scientist's wonder, even in the face of annihilation. On this world, a Kryptonian would not just be strong. They would be a god. They would have powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men. Powers that could be used to protect the people of their adopted home. To be a symbol of hope, as Tornori would say, a god. The idea was staggering. The last son of Krypton would not arrive as a refugee, but as a potential savior. A living testament to the greatness their people could have achieved. But the journey is long, and the course is fraught with peril, Jor-El said, his tone becoming grave once more. The navigational matrix must be perfect. It must account for gravimetric anomalies, asteroid fields, nebulae. A single miscalculation would send the ship into the heart of a star or leave it adrift in the void for eternity. He turned to Izal, the unspoken request hanging in the air. You want me to plot the course? Izal said, the words feeling heavy and momentous on his tongue. I need you to. Jor-El corrected him. Your mind sees patterns others miss. You will see the safe path through the storm. I am entrusting you with the single most important navigational calculation in the history of our race. He was asking him to be the ship's mind. Its architect, its librarian, its navigator. The weight of it all was crushing, but it was a meaningful weight. It was the burden of purpose. For the first time in his life, Izal's physical weakness, his suboptimal genetics, his social status, none of it mattered. Jor-El saw past the flawed vessel to the engine within. But a terrible thought intruded, a selfish, human pang in the face of this grand, tragic design. The ship, Izal began, his voice hesitant. It can only carry one. An infant. He didn't need to finish the question. Jor-El understood. He placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, his expression softening with a deep, paternal sorrow. I know what I am asking of you, Izal. I am asking you to dedicate what little time you have left to a future you will never see. To work tirelessly to save a life that is not your own. It is a terrible, unfair burden. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the hidden hangar, the silver ship, the star charts of a galaxy they would never explore. In a better world, a just world, you would be at the helm of our first exploration vessel. Your mind would have been our guiding star. But we do not live in that world. We live in this one. At the very end of its days, Izal looked at the unfinished ship, the vessel that would carry their entire legacy. He thought of the child who would sleep within it, A child who would awaken on a new world with the power of a god and the accumulated knowledge of a billion souls. He would need a guide. He would need more than just raw data. He thought about the choice he was being given. He could return to his quarters, to his menial duties, and wait for the end with the rest of his people, lost in the quiet despair of their collective denial. He could fade away as the insignificant scribe the council believed him to be, or he could be here. He could have a hand in shaping the future. He could pour his soul into this one, final, desperate act of hope. He could be a part of the last, greatest story Krypton would ever tell. The choice was not a choice at all. What do we do first? Izol asked, his voice clear and steady, the tremor of fear and despair gone, replaced by the quiet, unyielding strength of purpose. A rare, genuine smile touched Jor-El's lips. It was a sad smile, but it was a smile nonetheless. It was the look of a man who, at the end of all things, had found his one true ally. First, Jor-El said, turning back to the complex data swirling in the air. We begin the delicate art of compressing a universe into the palm of a hand, and so they began. As Krypton's crimson sun continued its slow, inexorable march toward the horizon of their existence, two of its sons, one a disgraced visionary and the other a dismissed scribe, worked in secret. They were surrounded by the ghosts of their people, the silent data of a billion lives, and they worked to forge a single, tiny vessel of hope. They could no longer save their world, so they would build a new one, a world of memory and potential, and send it hurtling toward a distant yellow sun.